I am bringing you map stories that are made using clickable maps, and to give you a little bit of idea about where these come from. The stories, you will see examples of stories. They have grown out of my wonderful opportunity to work with teacher teams. I've worked with a 6th grade teacher team for 5 years and a 4th grade teacher team for 2 years. And these teams were brought together by Becky Bush. So the stories are made working with teachers who are actually in the classroom. I'm going to go to my next slide. I will show you some examples of clickable maps. We have more than 30 clickable maps, and I've picked just a few. And just to explain a little bit more about clickable maps before we actually look at them, I first made clickable maps about 15 years ago, which seems a really long time ago. And this is when I was teaching college students and working with GIS software called ArcView. But that was not very accessible, especially to elementary school students. But thanks to the technology talents of Phil Gersmill, my husband, and Dave Johnson, we can bring clickable maps to your students today. For example, we have 4th grade students manipulating clickable maps in Grand Haven, and they presented the knowledge that and the fun that they gained from a clickable map of Michigan. They presented that to the school board of Grand Haven. I'm going to go on. I have 4 presentations. Some are a little bit longer, some are shorter, to give you an idea of grade levels that these could be perhaps used with. The ancient cities and the Africa presentations and clickable maps we have used with 6th and 7th grade. The Michigan and the US history clickable maps we have used with 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and I'm pretty sure they could be useful in 8th grade. So we'll look at 4 presentations, and then we can delve into actually looking at them either by a demonstration or by you all clicking on choosing particular clickable maps, and we have time at the end, or if I can have someone help me, we'll kind of follow the, if you have chat questions. Talking about chat, if for sketches, it's really important that you put your name into the chat. Okay. So let me admit somebody else here.
He'll do that.
Okay. So I'm going to start with the first map, and this is about ancient cities. There are 27 clickable maps available. Up at the top of this screen, you see the web link, and we'll let you go there later. If I could just show you, I'm going to start with most 6th grade appropriate clickable map, but as you can see, the US maps and the Michigan map would be appropriate for other grades. I'm taking you to the middle column where it says World Geography and History, to a clickable map that is titled Ancient Cities. We use the Ancient Cities clickable map and the story about the ancient cities in our 6th grade Giants, Unit 1, Lesson 1, where our emphasis is on world maps. This is what you see when you first click on the Ancient Cities Clickable Map. I have added the continent names here because that's one of the things we like to make sure that students know at the beginning of 6th grade. But the map story that I will show you briefly here uses what I call people layers and nature layers. They're going to be our main characters, and we're going to see how they work together with each other. Our story is about ancient cities. That means cities that were the largest cities in the world 2,000 years ago. They were the equivalent of New York City and Tokyo 2,000 years ago. And just to give you a feeling for what a large, magnificent city looked like in 300 BC, there are models and then recreations of Babylon. Babylon was the world's largest city with a population of 200,000 in 300 BC. A spectacular city in the Middle East. We'll show you on a map where it's located soon. Another of the magnificent cities of the past. This one a little bit closer to us in time, but still 100 AD, an ancient city. In the city of Rome in 100 AD had 1 million residents. The painting shows the amazing architecture of the Forum, sort of the downtown of ancient Rome. They're not so far apart, Rome and Babylon, although they're about 400, 500 years apart in time. In place, they're kind of close to each other. What you see on this slide is if I turn on two of the layers in this clickable map about ancient cities. There's a layer about the top 12 cities in the year 100, and there's a layer about the top 12 cities in 430 BC. And we're going to take a look at these ancient cities. And the first thing to ask of this visual representation, this map, is, are they scattered all over the world? Are they on every continent? And the students, I think, will be able to say, no, they're not on every continent. They are on Europe, Asia, and Africa. They are not, at this time, this early, they are not in North America, South America, or Australia. For all of these maps, we really would like to encourage students to describe what they see in their own words. And in this case, we'd like to talk about the pattern. These 12 largest cities at two ancient times are not scattered all over the world. And how would students describe what they see? Do they see clumps? Do they see a circle? Do they see a line of cities? Before we had to do remote learning, we literally used to have students draw circles or draw a line on a paper map, a black and white reproduction of this map. What do the students see? If we can get them to put this into what they see, I have tried to make a prompt that would say, well, is this maybe a wide line or kind of a ribbon or a Band-Aid or a patch? That's important because these cities are not all over the place. The big question is, why are they here in this kind of long, wide line, this patch, this ribbon? Why are they here? And we had been talking about people layers. I've turned on some very helpful line layers that show, it may be a little faint, that show the Tropic of Cancer, the Equator, and the Tropic of Capricorn. The equator is not just something to be memorized. It really does have meaning. And I think we'll see this meaning pretty soon. And the question becomes, where are this ribbon of cities, where are these ancient cities in relationship to the three lines? Which line are they closer to? And hopefully the students will see the Tropic of Cancer, which suddenly has a new meaning. They're not real close to the equator, and we'll just remember that one, and I can point to it here. There is one that is closer to the equator. It's on an island. Okay. We've been talking about people layers, but now we're turning to nature layers because we're going to investigate temperatures as a possible explanation. And in order to do that, I am going to turn on the temperature key, which you see in the corner over here. And I have highlighted the coldest temperatures, and that's because that's a layer that has been turned on. And the question is, where are the coldest temperatures in the world? Where are they in relationship to the equator? And I just have moving away from the equator, we can see Minnesota, where I used to live, has an average annual temperature of 44. On Greenland, on the southern part of Greenland, the average annual temperature is 22. There are some really amazingly cold year-round places in Siberia that have an average annual temperature of 4 and of 8. But the point here is these really cold temperatures are not close to the equator. I realized that when I was teaching in New York City in the inner city high school, that 10th and 12th graders had no concept about temperatures. What do we know about cold places? They are not even today places where you see large cities. Can you imagine trying to have a city of 200,000 people or 1 million people in these really cold places? There are very few people live in Antarctica, and very few people. There certainly are no major cities in Antarctica. One of the terrible problems in the coldest places far from the equator is the problem of permafrost, permanently frozen soils except for the top 6 inches. Even in summertime, the soil 90 feet deep will remain frozen. And then you have this slipping and sliding, slightly melted top, which is a terrible thing to put buildings on. So we come to combining, and this is the wonderful thing about Clickable Maps, is you can turn on our people layer, our cities layer in relationship to the cold temperature layers. And what we see are, what is the relationship between ancient cities and cold temperatures? Or what is the relationship between ancient cities and warm temperatures? To look at the cold temperatures, we see none of the ancient cities inside the region of cold temperatures. A few of them are close to a cold temperature because that is a very high mountain in the Himalayas. The ancient cities are not in the warmest temperatures, but they are close to the hottest temperatures. A summary that, and I don't know how many of your students are familiar with Goldilocks, but what we would like students to realize is that the ancient temperatures are in the in-between. They are certainly not in the coldest temperatures. They're not in the middle of the hottest temperatures. They're in between, kind of the just right, not too hot, not too cold. Um, Ancient cities we put at the beginning of our giant sixth grade course curriculum. It has a lot of jobs to do. It's a review of continent names. It's a review of equator and tropic lines. It's an introduction to clickable maps. It's a preview of how we look at topics in relationship to each other, geographic analysis. Um, Students can start to build a mental map of global environments. Northern, the extreme northern parts of continents are very cold. And it's a reminder that people do take into account the environment that they're going to try to build a city in. Um, I will take you later to show you how to get into the Giants curriculum. And let me, escape. Okay. For the next presentation, I'd like to take you to Africa. And I'll click on past this. Our Africa story also uses people layers and nature layers. The Africa clickable map you see is in the orange column of clickable maps. This is called Africa latitude, and you will see how important the equator is, for example. Africa is an important continent. It is one of our focus continents in Unit 1. It is the largest, it is the second largest population and has the fastest growing population compared to other continents. I'd like to emphasize that we will see differences within Africa. Africa is not all alike. For example, it has 56 countries. There's the link that we will go to later. The clickable layers, I think there are close to 30 layers. Yeah, 30 layers on the clickable map of Africa. You will see that you think of some of these layers as nature layers so that we look at what nature has put in place and we can't do a whole lot about as people. There are also what I would call people layers, for example, empire capitals, religions, and the people layers include what people have brought to a place or what they have done in a place. One thing that we will focus on, a nature layer in Africa, is precipitation. But the story gets built because we're going to show nature layers and people layers together with each other. Examples of nature layers. What do we find in wet places? Charming chimpanzees in the African rainforest, very enlightening name. Also in the African rainforest, wherever it is rainier, parts of Africa is mosquito. We will find there is a problem mosquito that spreads malaria, which is terrible, particularly for pregnant mothers in Africa. But there are also extremely dry places in Africa. This is a photo from the Sahara. Technically, a desert would have less than 10 inches of rain a year, and this particular photo shows less than 10 inches of rain a year. In comparison, Detroit gets about 38 inches of rain in a year. Some of our people layers, you will very soon see a camel layer. People from Southwest Asia brought camels to Africa. They were used to provide milk. Camels were, before automobiles, thinking 800 years ago, camels were the way to move goods around. People brought camels, used camels. People also brought cities, and we are going to be talking about large cities like Timbuktu, which was an important trading center in the northern part of Africa. We start with just a few layers to get oriented. First, a size comparison. I think you can see Texas. We've clicked on the layer called Texas size. Africa is huge. And being huge, we might anticipate if Texas has a lot of differences within Texas, you can imagine there are going to be a lot of differences within Africa. Another important line that I have turned on is the equator. And this is, we would like the equator to have meaning. It's not just something we test on a map. You will see that it truly has meaning for people's lives in Africa. One important thing about the equator is that it is warm and rainy throughout the year. Every month of the year is warm and rainy at the equator. Very, very different from Michigan. Now to our first story. We've turned on camels, and whether you're teaching third grade or sixth grade or high school, it's important that students try to describe where camels live inside Africa. And, we might try to anticipate what a third grader would say, and maybe they'd say the camels are in the top of Africa. Maybe a sixth grade student would know to use the small compass rose here to say, well, the camels are mainly in northern Africa, or not just the top part of Africa. Or a third grader might say the camels are in the bulge at the top. It's important that students verbalize what they see. One thing we could say is the camels are not living directly at the equator. In contrast, I've turned on chimpanzees and just isolating them right now from the camels. And where are chimpanzees in Africa? And really, the equator becomes very important to describing the chimpanzees are not only in the middle sort of Africa, they are close to the equator. And what we're trying to lead students to think about is maybe camels and gorillas like different conditions. They prefer to live in different conditions. So I added not a people layer, but a nature layer to our story. And it's circled at the top. It's rainy days. And the really important questions I think about this layer is where are most of the rainy days? More than 180 days of the entire year are rainy. Where are the very few rainy days? Fewer than 10, for example, here. what happens as you move away from the equator, and this is why Africa is such an interesting continent. As you move north away from the equator, the rainy days decrease. As you move south away from the equator, the rainy days decrease. Very important for our story. What conditions do chimpanzees live in? What rainy day conditions do camels live in? It looks like camels much prefer, or the people who own the camels and want them to stay healthy much prefer that they live in the parts of Africa with fewer rainy days. You can see the effects of the wetter and the drier places on this wonderful satellite image, which I've clicked on. Could you draw the equator? And we're going to see the equator under the huge bulge of Africa through a tinier bulge. There it is. And the wetter conditions, you can tell by the green vegetation on the satellite image, are close to the equator. The drier conditions are farther away from the equator. And you probably remember where the camels are and the chimpanzees are. We're going to look next at a layer called malaria, which is spread by this ugly mosquito. It truly does harm people's health in the parts of Africa where you have a lot of malaria. The blue dots show the communities that have many cases of malaria, and the question is, where is malaria? Or if we go back, malaria would seem to be in the rainier parts of Africa, or if it's not so rainy in North Africa, but you have a river that is flowing out of the rainy part of Africa, we have malaria in places that are wetter or have lots of rain. I have worked with a sixth grade teacher, and can you guess what we have? The sixth graders working with the Clickable Map, and they turn on chimpanzees and they turn on malaria. And what do the sixth graders ask? They are concerned about whether chimpanzees get malaria. And if you go to the internet, you can find medical articles that find antibodies against malaria in chimpanzees. So apparently chimpanzees get less sick and fight off malaria better than people do. Okay, another people layer is the layer about the empire capitals. The empire capitals, I think, have a fascinating location. Are they in the rainiest part of Africa? And it looks like they are not in the rainiest part of Africa. They're kind of in a line, not in the driest part either, but on the edge of the drier part of Africa. They are closer to enough rain to grow a grain called millet for food. They are in a place where camels would carry gold from the rainier parts of Africa or ivory from the rainier parts of Africa to places where they could be traded in North Africa. One last people topic is, with camels came the religion of Islam. And notice the relationship between the green color on the map and camels. Here, show that. And Here's a link, and we'll take you to, this is in Unit 1, Lesson 2 of 6th grade Giants. You can go to Unit 1, and then in Unit 1, you can go to Lesson 2, and you will find, for example, the clickable map and preceding lessons there. I will escape. Okay. Should I double check if there are any questions, or um, do some of you teach lower grades? In which case, I can go to Michigan, which we use in grades 3 and 4 of Giants. I can go to U.S. history, where we have clickable maps.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll read them to you.
Let me go to Michigan. It's usable in many grades, and we will. Oops.
Back up.
I gotta back up.
Michigan, you want it?
All right.
Hey, Carol, one question that came in was if you could share your slides. I'll work with you after this is over, and I'll get those into your session on the platform. So they just
Oh,
go there.
I would be most happy, yeah, to get that out to everybody. Let's take a quick look at Michigan, if that's okay, to go ahead with a story about Michigan. We don't use this exact story in 4th grade, but you'll see, I think it's an important story. And it, like the other clickable maps, we can talk about people layers and nature layers. Where do you find the clickable map of Michigan? Here it is. We use it for grades 3 and 4. It has 29 layers, and you don't want the 3rd or 4th graders to turning on all of them at once. So usually we model how to use this. The nature layers are basically on one side. What has nature put in place that people have used? We can talk about indigenous people using nature back in the 16 and 1700s, but we can also we'll look at people layers. We will look at how people have built in Michigan, present day and in the past. Story 1, we're going to emphasize a few nature layers. And you all know what Michigan looks like. The grasslands that were there already turned out to be very useful for farming. Here I am in Kalamazoo, and there's the most amazing corn and soybean fields in what used to be grasslands about a mile from us. Lakes in past and present could be used for fishing. There were some wonderful resources available in different parts of Michigan, but the point is not all of Michigan. I've turned on 2 layers so that we might think what was available to indigenous people. There are places where corn grows very well today. There are places that were extremely good fishing areas in the past. And it's again, like with the other maps, it's important to take something that will turn out to be very important, the corn growing areas, and say, where is that located? And students might say it's in the bottom of the mitten. They might say it's in the south part of the mitten. But the best corn growing area is not scattered all throughout Michigan. I took these pictures from a wonderful resource that is available from the Michigan Geographic Alliance, called A Year in the Life of Alexander Henry. just to emphasize that important part of the story that I'm going to show you involves indigenous people who fished near the Great Lakes shoreline, who grew corn in the parts of Michigan where there was a long enough set of months that you had no freezing weather and you could grow corn successfully. I've turned on just two of the three fires, the Potawatomi and the Odawa. And the question here is for students, let's take the Potawatomi, the X's. And it's important that students say, where did the Potawatomi, where were most of their villages in the 1700s? And hopefully the students would say, well, the Potawatomi were in the southern part of the mitten. What I've done next is put the Potawatomi and the Odawa on top of or in relationship to the good corn growing area. And, it would look, and we would hope that the students would see that the Potawatomi were in an area where corn grows well. But that is not the end of the story about people, because looming in the eastern U.S. was another set of people, European Americans. This is from another clickable map that is called early 1700s. I turned on the population layer, and there was a sizable number of people who wanted to come to Michigan. I've turned on lakes, the lake layer, so that you can see where Michigan is located. European Americans wanted to come to Michigan from the east. They wanted to become because this they thought was a great place to claim inexpensive farmland. Many people in the early 1800s supported their families by farming. And I know this is a kind of strange layer to turn on. This is the nut tree layers. This is oak, hickory, walnut. And it turns out that many of the European Americans and immigrants from Europe had been told that a good place to find farmland would be a place that had nut trees. So they looked for nut trees because the guidebooks, the advertisements for this less expensive land in Michigan told them that if they found nut trees, this would be a good place where they could grow corn and wheat and fruit trees. And this does present a problem, however, because before the European Americans came here, we had Native Americans here earlier, some of whom, like the Potawatomi, were growing corn. And it turns out that the US government, close to the year 1830, made treaties that essentially were called removal treaties. And the number 1 treaty was the earliest, number 2 was later, number 11 was the last treaty that was made, that essentially removed Native American groups so that European Americans could purchase the land. Sometimes the Native American groups were moved far away. Sometimes they were moved onto smaller reservations that remained in Michigan. And what we might look for example, is how many of the early treaties from 1 to 6 involved the corn growing land, and it's all but number 5. This was very popular at first. The Potawatomi towns were affected by Treaty 1, Treaty 2, Treaty 3, Treaty 6, Treaty 7 and 8. And what happened to Potawatomi? In fall of 2019, my husband and I found one of the groups that was removed from Michigan and ended up in Oklahoma. They are called the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. They have their own reservation in Oklahoma, in central Oklahoma, eastern Oklahoma. And it is an amazing, amazing museum. They have recreated beautifully what life was like when their ancestors lived in Michigan. They also have highlighted the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And this is one of those things, not just a map, should students put into their own words, you know, how would students rephrase the removal of the Potawatomi from the Great Lakes was not achieved with a single treaty. There were a dozen treaties negotiated with specific villages, slowly organizing the removal of thousands of Potawatomi from their homelands. It's a bracing story. Gloria Wellen, an author, writes a small chapter book about one of the removals. The other, Odawa and Ojibwe. Okay, sorry. So I think I can stop there because we're running short of time, but that's an example of a story that could be told in the lower grades. Okay, let me go here. And I'm going to go, I will make available, I have 3 examples of U.S. history, 3 short stories with U.S. history with 3 different clickable maps, but I think we'll go on to designing an inquiry with clickable maps. You need to find the clickable maps, and we'll make sure that I have that up in front of you in just a moment, not long at all. It helps to pick a layer that has a puzzle. You can ask, why? Why are the camels in the north part of Africa? Why were the ancient cities in such a narrow ribbon in a small part of the world? There are some interesting layers like mosquitoes, and you can figure out even if you don't like mosquitoes, what they think is a great place to live. What would you turn on to find out what they like? You can explore layers that have a negative effect on, for example, on building the ancient cities. It just was too cold and probably still is too cold. And the students can look at the influence of what was available in nature on where Europeans decided to demand, European Americans decided to demand that treaties remove native peoples. So let me escape from this, okay? And we will make sure that you have the most important links for the clickable maps. You can see here, there's also a place there's a link for finding or getting started with the Giants curriculum lessons. You have my email on this slide so that you can contact me with a question. And I know Dave will help so that the presentations that I got ready, you can have them, you can download them, you can use them however you want. They're not a rehash of what is in the Giants curriculum already. They're kind of built new for tonight. So maybe Dave can let me know if there are any other questions. I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope you have some fun with the clickable maps.
Carol, I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay.
Adam was saying.
I have one question. When you were using the clickable maps, I seen like rings come around some of the information to highlight it, but I didn't see the feature in there for me to do it.
Oh, when you see that button, I was just highlighting the button, but what you do is you press on that button and it will make the layer appear on the map.
Okay.
And you'll also see that there's a black button and it says clear the map. Sometimes you just get too many layers turned on and you want to just start over again without having to click every one of them off.
Carol, I threw the link to the overall menu of clickables in the chat for people who wanted to take a look at it tonight. And I know it's also linked in your PowerPoint, but people who want to go, hey, I want to take a look at this now, they can see that.
Oh, yeah, everything is free. And thanks to Dave Johnson, who you see in the little picture, his amazing tech skills has taken this from something that's tied up in a GIS and put it on the web so third graders and fourth graders can click on the buttons that you see on the clickable map. As I've been going through them, I know Dave is going to work on some fixes in the summertime because I found that some of the buttons don't work, but the buttons worked well enough for me to make the presentations for tonight.
Rogue programming errors. Sometimes I can't even tell you why they don't work. They're set up properly. They call back to the right subroutines. They just don't.
But a whole bunch of fourth graders and a whole bunch of sixth graders are really happy that what works does work. So thank you.
Also, I teach high school. Do you know of any similar free resources for high schoolers?
You're welcome to use anything you find in Giants. Anything. Oh, there. What do you teach? What class do you teach?
Is what class don't I teach? I teach almost everything at the high school level from 9th to 11th grade, especially with everything virtual.
Yeah, I taught, when I was in New York City, I taught, it's called Global History and Geography, and that was a 2-year course for 9th grade and 10th grade, and I taught AP Human Geography, but I really, and that's where I came up with the notion that my 10th graders and my 12th graders had no concept of where the cold parts of the world were. They lived in New York City, for heaven's sakes. They had relatives in Ecuador, or they had relatives in Pakistan, but they had no notion of where the cold parts of the world were. And yet they were supposed to be learning about ancient civilizations. So in 2010 and 2012, I really could have used the clickable maps and a whole bunch of things from the Giants curriculum. So anything you can find in the Giants curriculum and in the clickable maps, and maybe Dave can also put up, there's more resources, not just clickable maps, but in this notion of geographic big ideas, there are chapters that students can go through. It's like a textbook, a digital textbook, but broken up into chapters where you can look at different parts of the world. And that's all free. It's up there to be used, and it's up there because my husband worked on it, and because Dave Johnson constructed a way for you to get at it.
And Margaret, I think for high school in particular, you might want to take a look at the 2 geohistograms that are up there. There's one for the world, there's one for the US, and those kind of transcend a grade level, but there's quite a few in here that you can, there's quite a few in there that could be applicable in the high school US and world history classes. And I've been told Phil has more on the deck for me to put together in the future, so.
I can sneak sort of over into here and say, most of these clickables were originally designed for use in my college classrooms when I taught at the University of Minnesota.
Okay, I feel a lot better now. I feel a lot better.
Oh, that was a great question. Thank you for asking it.
You are so welcome. Because I have been looking for maps, since we've been forced to go virtual.
Right.
Yeah, it's very hard, to find something that's, focused on education.
And we have been doing a lot of revising since the remote learning started. One of my 6th grade teachers is doing only remote teaching, and she has built. I have done a whole lot of revising so that presentations get shorter, that that activities become indestructible. You can put it up there and the students can't change it, but they can add to a map. They can show show evidence that they were looking at a presentation. I have special ed teachers who take a presentation, and during a unit, they put the presentation up in Google Classroom so that students can review a presentation. So we've tried to make it short enough. We've done a lot of revising.
I'd also add that if you go to the Clickable Maps, there are 3 gray buttons at the top of that menu, and they take you over to some interactive chapters and some activities, and a lot of those were originally designed for the use in the college classroom, and then adapted and simplified in order to work in the earlier grades. But the regional package, the left-hand column of buttons, is very usable all the way up to grad school. It asks big questions about the different regions of the world.
Okay, I think we're getting to the end of our time. I can stop sharing my screen, I think. Okie doke. Oh, now I'm
There's a
here.
downside to that.
All right. Well, again, any questions? Be happy to share whatever you would like of the presentations, and you have my email if you have questions too.